Welcome to our latest explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a grim, dark, gothic fable to unpack the philosophy of the Wille and Narr sovereign. Picture this. You're a knight, or maybe a priest. You've just stepped into a claustrophobic 6x4 stone room, entirely expecting to uncover some grand divine truth. But instead, you're met by a cynical jester. He's the architect of your unmaking, and he's about to trigger a complete psychological breakdown. So the jester leans against the cold stone, his bells completely silent. Inside his head, this deeply cynical thought starts brewing. He's thinking, look at them, trembling in their nameless state, searching the distant sky for a creator. But out loud, he just mutters a low rattle of a riddle. He asks, what is the scripture written in the ache of bones? Right off the bat, he's establishing that the answers aren't floating up in the heavens somewhere. They're bound to the painful, literal, physical reality of being human. Now, the jester is basically standing at the threshold of the abyss here, and he's juggling three rusted locks: duty for the knight, sanctity for the priest, and reason for the minds of men. When these two seekers actually demand the key to the celestial gates, the jester just laughs inwardly. He hands them a jagged, lightless stone instead. He knows that these grand concepts, duty, sanctity, reason, they're really just heavy weights. They're performative robes meant to drag them down into a void of meaninglessness. And you can see how this sharply contrasts their performative search with their terrifying new reality. I mean, through the priest's eyes, he was expecting monumental temples and distant skies, right? Through the knight's eyes, it was all about the clanking steel of combat. But the jester forces them into this claustrophobic 6x4 cell. There are zero unreachable heights here. It's just a space way too small to hold a lie. And it's perfectly designed to make sure their metaphorical and physical armor absolutely shatters. Okay, let's move on to Parable 1, the shed face. This introduces the sovereign law of the nameless identity. Here, the jester uses philology as a literal weapon against them. He completely breaks down the very words they use to define themselves. See, the sovereign doesn't wear a persona, because a persona is quite literally a mask for a stage. It's a weight that murders the man underneath. He actually digs into the old tongue to define identity as a sameness, basically the constant repetition of a lie until a hollow ghost completely replaces the living, breathing human. So this sovereign law demands a very literal psychological breakdown. Step 1, you abandon your hollow social rituals. Step 2, you become nameless, totally stripping away those performative titles. And finally, step 3, with all those societal functions gone, you have to confront your own internal emptiness. It is a terrifying descent, for sure, but it is the absolute only way to reveal the authentic creature to the creator beneath all that armor. Just imagine the knight standing before a mirror in that suffocating dark. He suddenly realizes he has spent a lifetime just repeating the knight. His identity has effectively erased the man beneath the iron, and it hits him with absolute horror that he's really nothing more than a ghost haunting his own life. Then we hear this unceremonious clang, echoing as his breastplate hits the cold stone floor. By shedding his physical armor, the knight finally gets the jester's cynical truth. His illusion of external grandeur wasn't protecting a realm, it was just a cage protecting an internal emptiness, keeping him from ever feeling the actual ache in his bones. This physical unmaking is the ultimate catalyst for a profound, shared realization between the two men. That brings us to Parable 2, the liturgy of the wound. This perfectly deconstructs the unwoundable fallacy. As they sit there in the dark, a fascinating conversation sparks up between the shattered knight and priest about the linguistic evolution of vulnerability. They trace it back to the Latin word vulnus, the wound. Think about it. At minute 1, the knight only understood literal, physical combat wounds. But by minute 30, their metaphorical armor is totally breached. And by minute 60, they are confessing to each other that this vulnerability is the psychological holy meeting place of raw warmth. This is exactly where the priest's worldview shatters. He had spent his entire life seeking to be sacred, set apart in a hollow cavern of ceremonial silence, elevated way above the common man. But the jester's truth completely mocks this. The priest realizes that the divine doesn't exist in cold isolation. It's the raw warmth that flows only when the long-held silence of the ego completely evaporates. Next up is Parable 3, the Ember Voice. Let's look at what happens when two lost individuals stop performing. Stripped of their titles and that clanking steel, the heavy language of status is basically dead. Instead, the sovereign speaks in what's called the ember voice. This is that honest, warm, and vulnerable confession that becomes the small, glowing true thing you find in absolute darkness. The jester's kingdom isn't built on formal pronouncements, right? It's built on the raw human connections sparked by actually engaging with your shared mutual failure, by admitting how lost you truly are. And finally, Parable 4, the body as sanctuary. This is the ultimate revelation where the human and the holy intersect. The jester gestures over to their trembling, nameless forms. Inwardly, he's musing to himself. They finally see it. The external world is dead to them. Then out loud, he reveals the answer to his earlier riddle. He says, the architect's finest work isn't a church reaching into the distant sky. It is the house you carry. The body itself is the divine representation. Locked in that 6x4 cell, external achievements literally mean nothing. It's the temple that breathes. This breaks down the jester's deeply cynical, yet honestly profound definition of enlightenment. It requires a deliberate reduction of physical distractions, meaning stripping the armor, and a deliberate reduction of psychological distractions, meaning abandoning the ego completely. When you literally have nothing left to defend, that terrifying internal emptiness suddenly becomes a protective, shared warmth. The creator is found right there, in the shared honesty of the flesh. So what's the core takeaway of the Wille Narr Sovereign's hidden bounty? It's that true strength has absolutely nothing to do with what you project to the outside world. The sovereign rules through courageous, shared struggle. The sovereign entirely rejects titles and clanking steel. The sovereign completely negates public identities. The only truth that actually matters is found in the ache of bones, in the real, painful, shared experience of just being human. We're going to leave you with this final provocative thought from the bottom of the abyss. The knight and the priest, they literally had to lose their entire worlds to find themselves in that dark room. So I'll ask you to consider this. If the architect's finest work is the house you carry, who are you when your metaphorical armor finally falls away? What is actually left when you finally stop performing your own identity? Thank you so much for exploring the dark with us in this explainer today. Keep questioning those masks you wear, and we'll see you next time.